Hi everyone, my name is Max and today I'm making a cold juice press. This is the one I have at the moment and it's not that great. The problem is that all the produce needs to be squeezed through this tiny hole and it just doesn't work. Something always gets stuck in there and then you have to take everything apart, which is a big mess. Cleaning this is difficult anyway, since the produce gets stuck in the fine mesh. This juicer does three things: grinding, squeezing and extracting. And there are trade-offs between the three tasks. I think I can come up with something simpler and better. A simple hydraulic press made from plywood and a car jack. You put the chopped vegetables in a bag and place it on a stainless steel tray from where the juice flows into a cup. This is very similar to how juice was made 100 years ago. So why shouldn't it work now? I started by forming a tray for the produce. This needs to be made from food-safe material, so I used a sheet of stainless steel. There's no welding required. I wanted this project to be as accessible as possible, because I think that juicing is pretty healthy and a convenient way to consume more vegetables. I used pieces of plywood to guide my bends. The strategy was to clamp down anything that I don't want to bend. This worked surprisingly well. For the back of the tray, I needed to fold the material over so it would stay watertight. Relief cuts were not an option. So I clamped down everything super solid so nothing could move but the backside itself. I tried out different methods as I went along. It's amazing how much you can do with just a pair of pliers. I found that sheet metal is very forgiving. Once the corners were flat, I folded them over with a hammer. I did not expect that this would come out so nice. Next up, the funnel at the front. I had no idea how I would do this, so I started bending down the front section by hand. I hoped this would give me an idea on how to do it. But magically, it began to take shape on its own. After just a little bit of bending, I started to see a funnel forming. I kept going and used the same strategy as before, where I clamped everything down that I didn't want to move. Et voila! Now I just have to cut off the excess and grind the edges smooth. This would have been so much easier if the metal had been a little bit thinner. I can't emphasize enough on how surprised I was that all this worked. I did some sheet metal forming before, but only with proper huge and heavy equipment. I did not expect such results only with plywood, clamps and a hammer. I started with the sheet metal part because I wasn't sure if I could do it without welding. Now that is done, I can move on to building the press itself. This is 38mm Baltic birch plywood. It's the best stuff you can probably get. I got it almost for free at my local lumberyard. Every time I buy wood, I have a look around behind their huge saw. They always have scraps lying around, and they let me take a few pieces, and I give them a nice tip in return. So I cut everything to size, and I glued together some leftovers to form the plunger that pushes into the tray we just built. It will later be mounted underneath the top plate of the press. I used way too much glue and this was rather messy. Doesn't matter though, because everything gets painted at the end anyway. A plate cut from a cutting board will be attached to the plunger with magnets. It is very difficult to glue anything to HDPE, so I'm putting screws into the plastic and the magnets are going to be glued into the plunger. Dowels are added to make sure that the plate cannot slide around. 2 are enough for that, and I place them diagonally so the orientation of the plastic plate doesn't matter. The top and bottom plate of the press are getting a nice round over. I used the washers that I'm going to use later for reference so the radius is matching. This also gave me the exact position for the holes where the threaded rod is going to pass through the plate. The steel tray rests on this piece of wood and it will be pushed up by the car jack. I added some rails on the 3 sides to make sure that the tray would not slide around. I left the rails a little bit longer to cut them off later. This gives you a perfectly flush fit. And while I was at it, I also gave the tray holder some nice chamfers around the edges. The load decreases towards the edges, so they can be thinner. This also makes the part appear less bulky. Awesome! The wood part is done and we can move on to paint. I'm using a filler and primer spray to smooth out the relatively rough texture of the wood. Paint is made to look good and to be durable. The primer is there to help the paint stick to the wood. The first coat of paint always makes the wood fibers rise up. They can be easily sanded off though with 180 grit sandpaper. Now it's ready for paint, my favorite part. I'm using solvent-based indoor paint since it needs to be cleaned frequently. This paint is more durable, but it also takes longer to harden. You can touch it after a day or two, but the oils in the paint react with oxygen in the air, which can take weeks or even months to reach the final hardness. If you want this to be done quicker, you can use 2-component paint, which is just as good and hards with itself, but a little bit more expensive. Water-based paints are the easiest to work with, but they are not as durable. I'm just going to handle these pieces with care for the first week, and that should be fine. I also painted the hydraulic jack, and to make that process a little bit easier, I placed it on this thrust bearing. This is a 5-ton jack, but 2 tons should be enough. I calculated the required diameter of the threaded rod, and it came down to be at least 8 mm, so I chose an M10 thread. If you want to learn how to calculate this yourself, I'm going to post a video about this on my Patreon page soon. I'm using large washers and lock nuts for this. The lock nuts are important because on the inside the nuts lose contact every time you apply pressure. And of course once they lose contact they can spin freely and mess up the whole assembly. Here you can see how the magnet is glued in that holds the plastic plate. This works perfectly. Car jacks are not designed to retract on their own, so I'm using 2 large springs to pull it back down. The force of the hydraulic jack gets distributed by the steel plate, and the flange attaches to the cylinder. You can find these flanges in any hardware store. It is normally used for handrails. Mine didn't exactly fit the diameter of the cylinder, but there was a set screw inside, and once I tightened that up, it was a really good fit. These hydraulic jacks are super cheap. I have no idea how they managed to make a profit with them, but they even split the handles in 2 parts to cut down on shipping costs. I wanted my handle to be really rigid, so I fixed it together with screws. Normally the handle is also used to open this valve at the front. That's okay for the casual user, but not for this application. You need to open it all the time. The most simple solution I came up with was using this polymer that melts in hot water. This stuff is incredibly versatile and super cheap. You can remelt it over and over again to get the right shape. Much better than Sugru, and you buy it for $10 per pound. I put a link to it in the Instructable in the video description. I think the only reason that Sugru is more popular is because they spend far more money on marketing. And we're done! A cold juice press that you can build at home for just $40 in materials. It turned out just like I planned. For detailed instructions and a material list, you can check out the Instructable in the video description. But now it's time to make some juice. I mostly juice vegetables like cucumbers, celery and spinach, but I always throw a few green apples into the mix for a little bit of sweetness and sourness. I start by slicing the produce using a food processor, and then I place it inside a cheesecloth. The juice flows really easily. I do about 4 to 5 batches for a family of 4. All this juice comes from just a single apple. The pulp that you take out is bone dry, certainly just as dry as on my old juicer. You can just throw it out and reuse the cheesecloth over and over again. This is so much easier and more satisfying than my old juicer, especially the cleaning. The steel tray and the plastic plate can be rinsed off really easily. And the food processor is also easy to clean, but there are no more hidden corners or fine meshes where the pulp accumulates. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it inspiring to make something yourself. This was a lot of fun to build, and so far we've been using it every day. If you like these kind of videos, please also check out my other videos and subscribe to my channel. My name is Max Maker and I'm a product design engineer. I make all kinds of stuff, from electronics to woodworking and furniture. If you like, you can also support me on Patreon to get access to previews and more exclusive content. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, just post them in the comments below. I try to answer as many as possible.